So, how do you think your experience of reading poetry has been different as a woman poet than it would be as a man poet?
Reading poetry? My experience of reading poetry?
Performing poetry out loud.
Being a poet?
And sometimes you go to the, Rodney said sometimes you go to the bookstores and or to the meetings and you read your poetry publicly.
Publicly reading my work. So how that's been different for me as a woman poet than if I were a man?
Yes.
Well, not being a man, I don't know what the experience is like for a male poet. I do know that just sort of the culture that we live in, people are sometimes not as used to women being in positions of authority, or they're less comfortable with it. So I understand that that's sometimes that might be a factor when I'm standing up in front of a group and talking. That sometimes people can sort of inherently feel, a woman standing up in front of them talking to them can be sometimes threatening, or they don't like it. But that's not always the case. I think mostly, most of the audiences that I read for are pretty friendly. I think also, because I'm physically smaller, so I'm maybe not going to dominate my physical space the way maybe a man would, because men are usually larger than women.
Yeah.
So, I'm thinking about how I'm presenting myself to a group in a way where I'm looking like I'm projecting confidence and at ease with them. So, maybe being a woman, that's a factor as well. Does that answer your question?
I have another question. I'm
Sure.
also a woman poet. So how does being a woman poet makes them unauthoritative?
Well, I think it's not so much that being a woman makes you less of an authority, but it's that, in the culture we live in, which is largely still a patriarchal culture, where, in sort of a lot of different, professions, you don't necessarily have women in positions of power. And as a result, people still are not totally used to the idea of a woman assuming a position of authority. Or if people are used to it, there are still times when they may not be totally comfortable with the idea of a woman, projecting a certain kind of authority. So yeah, I think, women, whether they're poets or whether they're, in any other profession, that can be a factor. That simply being a woman, people, may be more critical of you, or they may have more difficulty in accepting criticism that you have for them. So does that answer your question?
Yes, Nikki. I've also been interested